the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Will the clerk take the roll?
Beauchamp,
Present.
Elliott,
Here.
Goodlow,
Here.
Lilquist,
Here.
David Miller.
Here.
Monica Miller. Here. Wynn.
Okay, there are no proclamations or awards or recognitions, so we are to the approval of the agenda.
Madam Mayor, move approval of the agenda as presented.
Second.
Motion and second for approval of the agenda as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
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 I too will vote aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Consent agendas before you.
Madam Mayor, move consent agenda.
Second.
Motion and second for consent agenda as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
I too will vote aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so now we have communication from Rotary Hearts. The Rotary Club brought this proposal to us a while back, and we have delayed because of policy issues. But now's a chance for them to present to the whole council what their ideas are.
Thank you. I'm Peggy Kaler. My address is 1961 Strandy Road, Ellensburg, Washington, and I'm here on the behalf of the Ellensburg Downtown Rotary Club. Initiating the, well, first we have a video to play. Can we play the video first, please? This will give you an idea of what the project is.
According to the latitude and longitude on the barn, I have made it to Duval, where love is in the air. In fact, it's all around the town, a not so subtle reminder that a very special day, Valentine's Day, is just around the corner. So if you've got it, flaunt it and make it a fundraiser.
The Rotary Club of Duval, for the 5th year in a row, from city limits north to city limits south, we spread love with our Duval Has Heart project. So every year, the Rotary Club of Duval hangs up these personalized hearts. And for $50, you can customize your own love message. And maybe it's a loved one, maybe it's your children, or even feature a business here in town. Walk the Hearts. It's about a mile from one end of town to the other. And hey, the hearts brighten it up, even if it's a cloudy day.
Bad news is it's sold out. Good news, it's a fundraiser.
Absolutely. And not only does it spread the love, but last year we were able to give away $18,000 in emergency food relief to agencies here in the Snoqualmie Valley. So all the money we raise, we're volunteers and we give it away.
No, I'm biased, but that's the most beautiful one in town. See, I was waiting for
We even have one proposal this year. The rumor is she said yes.
So now that you've had a chance to see what the project looks like, I have a few comments. Initiating the Ellensburg Has Heart project is relevant for our city, empowering positive involvement by community members by communicating messages of love, inclusion, diversity, and hope. This project has proven successful in the cities of Duval, Falls City, and North Bend using special event permits. Consider what Duval has done in a town that has only a 1 mile long main street and 5 stoplights and a population of less than 8,500. Think of the scope and scale for downtown Ellensburg and the potential that holds. It allows a fundraiser where we aren't asking for sponsorships from the businesses who are constantly asked for sponsorships. This project brings people to the downtown sector to search for their heart, resulting in participants discovering new businesses and spending time and money in local businesses. Imagine the Ellensburg Has Heart project filling the town with a loving, vibrant spirit, allowing people from all types of family to express their love for each other while raising funds for Rotary to continue to support the community. I'm sure you all have someone special you'll want to order a heart for, and orders are on a first come, first served basis. So get your orders in early. Thank you for your time. What are your questions?
Questions?
What area of town are you looking to hang these?
We're pretty open. A lot of the lamp posts in town, we've noticed, have bars already on them. That would make the most sense to me, but we do have bars that we can attach to the posts. Also in your packets that I passed out, I wanted to just give you a reminder of the projects that Rotary has already done for Ellensburg. And, those aren't things that we just all personally write checks for. Those are things we fundraise for. And I know that some of you are merchants in town, and it would be great to do a fundraiser that we aren't constantly asking for sponsorships from. And having had a local business myself for years, every time somebody walked in the door that wasn't a client, I was like, what do you need a check for? So this is a project that goes directly to the consumer, and people are super enthusiastic about it. But as far as where in town, I'd love to start it on one of the main streets so people really see it and get the idea, but we're open. Also included in here is a letter from the city development community director of Duval, Laura Thomas. Just letting you know how positively this has affected Duval and how much people just embrace this project like crazy. I know Laura had answered questions for you if you wanted to call and talk to her about it. The other thing I wanted to point out is that I did throw in here one of our trial applications. It's very similar to the one we did in Duval. I was in the Duval Rotary for years. The Rotary is in charge of all the messaging. We have the right to say no. We're not putting up anything that isn't a loving, kind message. If it's not a positive, loving message, it's not going up. You only get 25 characters. Russell's holding up. This is exactly what the hearts look like. This is the size of them. And we have the right to say no. So that takes the onus off the city. So no one's going to be mad that you're not putting up their message. It's on us. They're going to say they're going to say council wouldn't put up my message. No, has nothing to do with council. It's the Rotary. We wouldn't put up their message, and we're not putting up anything inappropriate. It says right in their application, we have the right to say no. And also I added the certificate of liability that Rotary provides for any of their volunteers. One thing that I would ask you guys is, if you have more questions for me, that's great. But we do kind of need to know sort of quickly, because we do need to get a move on with this project if we're going to be able to pull it off. If you have any questions about how they're hung, we're open to making changes on this apparatus. I'd love to tell you, I know exactly how it works. That'd be a big fat lie. But there's a metal loopy things that go with this that attach them to the pole. Whoever your people are in charge of that, we're happy to meet with them and talk it over if it needs to be more structurally sound on some level. Happy to work with that. The signs themselves are metal. This is a sticker skin that goes on it that we order and stick on every year. We keep the sign, the metal part, and reuse them every year. But they're real lightweight. They're not like heavy. They probably weigh less than a pound.
So would that it were so simple to just say yes or no?
I know. I know. I didn't mean tomorrow.
As we have explained to Mr. Ridgway, it is city attorney's belief anyway, if we allow you to use city property to put up your thing, to have messages, it would be, we get into First Amendment rights, and the city of Boston just went all the way to Supreme Court with this. And if they don't have an underlying policy that says when you can, any city can if you don't have an underlying policy, you have to let anyone put up their message. And Boston it was Satanic Temple. So that came to them after. So we need to have an adopted policy before we would be comfortable letting you put signs up. That is one issue. And so I would propose that we use our study session on January 3rd to hear from staff, look at a proposed policy that addresses the legal issues. For myself, with Rotary's proposal, I see added complications. You're controlling the message, not the city. And you are using it as a fundraiser. And so you're collecting money in order to use city property. So I want a discussion about whether we should be charging for the use of that city property. There's just some other questions and policy decisions that I think we would need to explore before we say yes. So I don't think you're going to be able to, we're not going to be able to have that in time for you to do a Valentine's Day promotion this year. If we study it on January 3rd, we would need, well, potentially one, but probably two, whether it's a resolution or an ordinance, determines whether it'd be two more meetings or one more meeting. And that I just can't see you having time to advertise and do all that you need to do if that were the case. So city attorney, have anything to add about the legal quagmire that this potential, we need to have this policy, whether or not Rotary wants to do this Hearts project, the basic policy of when do we allow banners and flags to be flown on city property needs to be, we need to have that underlying policy anyway.
Can I ask then how like CWU and the rodeo uses the poles?
Well, this Supreme Court decision was just in May. We need to have we need to have our discussion to resolve that.
Because there's CWU flags up right now.
The banners, they're not CWU, are they ours?
Through campus, those are CWU poles, I believe.
On
So,
campus.
Campus, yeah.
They're-
The
Oh,
banners.
they're down by Super One.
Are you talking
on-
about
on
Canyon, the
South Canyon Road.
myellensburg.com, the Ellensburg and CWU together? Those are city banners. And so done through our lodging tax advisory committee. So those are city owned and operated banners essentially.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time and please get back to us when you,
So there's
policy.
one more question for you.
sure.
If you have.
In the meantime, have you considered just reaching out to local businesses and maybe doing a similar thing on vinyl and their windows or sandwich boards, like other things that are not attached to city property? I mean, I think it's a great message and a fun project that individual businesses could decide to support in other ways. Just encouraging you to think about other options in the meantime.
Is there a concern with something being like this being placed outside of a building as it pertains to the city council?
I think if it's not using city property, if it were.
If it's an A board, then
We
that's
do,
on the blocking the sidewalk, right?
we do have a policy that regarding the board, the A-frame boards and
Yeah,
other
there's a sign
signs.
code.
But
Issues, but they could probably be addressed. I mean, that
Right.
would be community development.
on a private building, they still have to go through sign code.
But
permits.
temporary vinyl, I think is, and
Oh,
and
in
displays and
windows.
business windows are up to each business,
Right.
right?
Okay, thanks for the
So it
idea.
doesn't get totally bogged down in bureaucracy.
Yeah.
It could be something that you started this year and depending on what the where the conversation goes, could be elaborated on in future years.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for all that Rotary does for the community. We do appreciate it. Next is a letter from Parks and Recreation Commission regarding the use of hostile furniture in public spaces, page 73.
Good evening, Council, Madam Mayor, Brad Case, Parks and Recreation Director. There's a letter before you this evening from the Commission regarding the use of hostile architecture in public spaces. Back at the Commission's November 9th, 2022 meeting, they passed a motion 4-1 recommending that the council or the attached letter be sent to council for their review in consideration. And that letter is included in your agenda packet. I won't read it verbatim, but essentially the goal is to create welcoming and inviting outdoor spaces where people can socialize comfortably and build togetherness in our community. Hostile architecture is specific exclusionary design elements intended to push people along and not be comfortable enough for people to linger. Sometimes these are called anti-homeless architecture and can be often recognized as a park bench with armrests in the middle, metal brackets on concrete planters or benches, a bench that is uncomfortable for more than a few minutes for people to sit on. These fixtures are hostile to everyone and are designed to discourage people from lingering for a long time. And so the commission, by way of the letter, asks you to make a formal pledge not to install any hostile architecture in any public outdoor spaces in the city of Ellensburg. Subsequent to that action by the commission, a letter was written by one of our commission members, the lone dissenting vote in that motion to forward the letter to council. And that should have been on your dais this evening. And I won't read from that letter, but that was their thoughts and ideas moving forward with this. They wanted to share that. So designing public spaces is a complex process and is created and vetted through public input, staff input, city boards and commissions, and ultimately you, the city council. We're going through that process, two different projects right now with the Reed Park design, as well as the Unity Park design. These spaces are not planned or designed in a vacuum. When we design these public spaces, there are a wide range of factors that we consider. Ultimately, what is the goal or purpose of the park? Who or what types of activities is the park designed for? What are the potential impacts of the park on the surrounding neighbors? And is there a way to mitigate negative impacts? How well does the design impact the ability to adequately maintain the space? Does the design result in a place that the community will want to use and feel safe? And lastly, there are project budgets that oftentimes are the single most influencing factor in the final design. So to address this wide myriad and at times competing interests, there needs to be some flexibility throughout the design process. And so from the staff's perspective, if this request from the commission is something that you want to continue to look at and have us review, we would ask that we have time to develop a clear policy that we would bring back to you for future consideration. And in that would be included, but certainly not limited to, a clear understanding of what hostile architecture is, a process to review whether or not these amenities or design would be considered hostile, the impacts of using alternative design options and what those impacts might be, and then the flexibility, really to design a space that serves the greater population as a whole, while at the same time being mindful of the role design choices have in creating spaces that are open, inclusive, and that everyone can enjoy. So we do have a member of the Parks and Recreation Commission here this evening in case you have questions for the commission. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And with that, we would ask you that you review the recommendation and then provide staff with further direction on where you would like to go.
Are there questions for Director Case?
I've got one. With regard to the letter that was presented, you mentioned it was subsequently presented. I guess it's kind of a two-part question. The substance of the letter, was this part of the discussion prior to the vote of the commission 4-1? I mean,
Some
were
of it
these
was,
issues addressed?
Some of them were.
Okay.
I can't recall if every single one of them was, but there was a fairly robust discussion about this before it went to a vote.
Okay, so the majority of the commission felt that the recommendation to go forward was adequately researched, per se. So I guess my follow-on question would be, you've read the letter in detail. Do you feel that there are things in the letter that should be factored into the process going forward? And does that fall on staff?
I think those are incorporated in some of the staff recommendations
Mhm.
outlined in the agenda report. I think there are some valid points there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess where I was going with it is inevitably it's going to fall on staff to develop policy and with guidance or assistance from the commission, but you feel like there's an opportunity to incorporate at least the sentiment or the details into motions going forward. Not, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
Can I let you
it
know?
doesn't
Can I
necessarily-
let you know after we start that process?
yeah, well, I guess it's not, where I was going was it doesn't necessarily have to go back to the Parks and Rec Commission to factor this information into the work product. You've heard from the commission. I guess my question is to staff, as staff, or you feel like you have enough information to go forward? If the
I think so.
decision-
I mean, I think, as when we're designing spaces, we're trying to be mindful of those
Right.
types of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah, my only other observation was telling the city manager earlier that as sort of a blind test study of our own design approach, I'm anxious to see how our Unity Park design, without influence of commission or anyone else, how our consultants come forward with architectural design that isn't hostile or is hostile. That's sort of on a scale. I mean, I think there's an opportunity to see how well we're doing.
Yep.
Going forward. Anyway,
Yep.
So thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to speak to the issue? Let's see. I'm not sure. Okay, I do not see anyone online who has their hands raised. I guess I do have a question, Brad. Given that we don't have to accept a design from the architect that has furniture we don't like. It all goes through the Parks and Rec Commission and the council anyway. Can't we deal with this on a case-by-case basis?
to some, yeah, I within park facilities, yes. I mean, I think because there's more of a vetted process, but we're talking about all public spaces, not just related to parks necessarily. I believe that's the request is.
Okay, so all public spaces. But, okay,
And there's, I mean, there's a point where, reviewing design and concept, in terms of the development process, I mean, we get to the point where you develop you accept a plan. And then we're working with the consultant or the architect to really kind of fine tune that. And, some of those things, don't necessarily come back to the council or the commission for review, but we do hear input from council members talking about the need for the space to be inclusive. And I believe, Council Member Goodlow mentioned that when we were talking about the concept confirmation is really trying to, reiterate the point that this is, a downtown gathering place. It creates unity, and we really need to make sure that when we're designing, going through the final design of it and picking out kind of the details that is incorporated in it. So, through comments like that, those are things that we remember and that we use moving forward.
Okay. Council, do you have guidance for staff?
Well, I guess, starting down this road, I am not in favor of a blanket ban. Not even understanding what, exactly what we're talking about. But I think we can very easily have unintended consequences if we just issue an outright ban. So whatever we do, it needs to be flexible to meet the needs of the community and the specific park.
Similar to what Councilmember Belli has said, if it was a case by case basis, depending on the location of the park or the area in which we're talking about, then that's open for discussion. But just doing a blanket one, I would not be in favor of that either. I would agree in general. I think we kind of need to know if we're going to define something that we don't want. I think we need to have a better grasp of what that is, and it could be largely subjective. But it occurs to me that, if you think back, it hasn't been that many years ago since ADA accessibility was mandated. And I know that parks and public spaces prior to that weren't designed intentionally to prevent access to people with disabilities, or to provide that accessibility. But it took time to incorporate those features into design everywhere. So I'd like more conversation. I don't want to just push this off and say, well, we don't know really what we're talking about, so let's not do anything. I think we should have maybe this is an area that staff might be able to do some additional research for us and give us a little bit more. I agree. I don't think we should try to, with the best intentions, create a blanket ban of things we really don't fully understand.
Staff's suggestion is that we send it back to them to develop a very clear policy for our consideration. That includes what you're saying, what is defining hostile furniture, a process for review, other design options, and I think we do need to hear from our police officers and others that have to deal with the complaints that I get and I'm sure they get way more than I get about unhoused people being scary in our public spaces. And not everyone, I appreciate what was brought forward is a very compassionate letter that was written. And I'm all for having inclusive spaces and welcoming spaces. And I just have to note that some people find those spaces very unwelcoming when they're occupied by groups of loud, rowdy teenagers or certain other kinds of people. It's just the comfort level isn't just about the furniture and the feelings of safety and who can use the space. So, but if we wanted to move forward with staff's recommendation, all of it could be discussed in more detail.
Madam Mayor, I like the idea of more discussion, and I particularly like the collaborative process put forth in this letter by Ms. Katie Kelleher, who is on the Parks and Rec Commission, and perhaps direct staff to take these comments into consideration as well as the others that have been put forward in the letter.
Is there consensus to proceed as staff has suggested? Yes.
So
I'm seeing head nods. So, thank you. So we will move on. This is a citizen comment on non-agenda issues. So this is a time when folks can approach the council. You would have 3 minutes to speak on issues that are not otherwise on the council's agenda for this evening. Is there anyone signed up? Oh, no. Okay. Is there anyone in the room who would like to speak on issues that are not on the agenda for tonight? Ms. Thomas?
That include the study session agenda?
Sure, it does include, or sure she can speak?
She can speak to it.
Because it wasn't on the,
Yes.
okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Arden Thomas. I reside at 731 South Thorpe Highway. I'm technically right outside the city borders, and I promise that every time I pay for entry into the pool, I pay the non-citizen rate. I'm here tonight in my official capacity. I'm Water Resources Manager for Kittitas County, and I'm also staff to the Flood Control Zone District. Flood Control Zone District operates countywide. We collect fees countywide. We operate in unincorporated county and all the incorporated areas, including city of Ellensburg. My comment tonight primarily is really to offer my thanks for the study session earlier today. And I wanted to make an introduction, frankly, and let you know that we really do aim to be a resource. And so I want to make sure, I think I'm a known entity to all of your staff, but I wanted to make sure that everybody on council knows that we really appreciate and invite inquiries from residents countywide, from council members who have questions. And we field a lot of questions about flood maps. Why are people within mapped floodways? What is the risk to my property? Can I rely on the FEMA maps? So just know that we're available as a resource. Frankly, to conducting flood risk mapping and petitioning to have the regulatory risk maps reflect that information has been a central component of the flood control zone district. And if there are questions about that work or anything else that we're doing, for example, we have some stream gauges up and running that we're very excited about. We've been doing some land conservation to really align removing properties from flood risk and also securing land to be a resource community-wide. We'd be happy to come and share that work of the district with you. I'm also aiming to work to support your staff, kind of making connections with FEMA, with the state, just so that everybody kind of has a mutual understanding of kind of how FEMA views the world. From the presentation you saw today, it's full of FEMA speak and can be quite a learning curve as somebody who came into it outside that world to come up to speed. So again, thank you for the time and your work here tonight.
Thank you, Arden. Is there anyone else who would like to speak for 3 minutes on topics not on the agenda tonight? Mr. Kelleher.
Pat Kelleher, 6530 Wilson Creek Road. There's 2 parks under review right now, Unity and in Reed Park, and I've been spending some time going through the other parks. And a concern that I addressed last 2 weeks concerning the parks, and I guess I'll just keep at it at 3 minutes at a click. At least 8 of your parks are not ADA compatible. ADA is not a goal, it's a law. 1990, state parks faced the issue. They surveyed all their parks, worked out a plan to implement. That was 30 years ago. Just looking at some of your parks, our parks, the McElroy is an ADA, but the toilet could probably be serviced. The Rotary Park has ADA parking, but the mobile toilet there is not ADA compatible. That's the dog park is probably one of the later additions to a park. So when the off season comes, we just say, hey, if you have special needs, don't come to our park. The skate park, once again, not a ADA mobile toilet. The door is broken. There's graffiti. It's mounted on a curb. So it's just a lack of caring. Mountain View Park is on a hill, non-ADA. Memorial Park or Kiwanis Park, it has no toilet facility. Most of the things that I've mentioned here take the upgrade of $100, moving a mobile toilet to an ADA mobile toilet. It's $100 rental, buys $200 rental a month. To put a toilet in where there isn't a toilet, mobile toilet would be $200. So we're looking at for the 8 that I'm looking at right now, $1,100, which, it's money, but this isn't a goal. This isn't a desire. This is the law. And for the city to not follow the law, not adhere to the law, I find puzzling. I have tried to find, what is your level of service that you're providing at your parks? Maybe I'm incorrect in reading this. If I am, write me a letter and tell me, hey, we're good with these 8. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on non-agenda issues? Seeing no one come forward and no one raising their hands online, we will move to introduction and adoption of ordinances and resolutions 9A. This is the second reading of ordinance 4900, the biennial budget ordinance. We are on page 79.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. I'm Keith Bassett with the city's Finance Department. The 2023-2024 biennial budget ordinance before you this evening is prepared for your consideration of second reading and adoption. The budget provides expenditure authority to maintain the city's operations and infrastructure and makes targeted investments to address priorities identified in the council strategic vision and maintains the city's sound financial position, including preserving reserve levels as required by the city's financial policies. The budget before you is a product of disciplined and public process. The city council has held 5 public hearings for the purpose of receiving public comment on this budget or elements thereof. The 2023-2024 biennial budget expands capacity and aligns resources with the council strategic vision 2023-2028 through enhancements targeting housing affordability, economic vitality, a safe and inclusive community, energy and resource management, and sustainable infrastructure. In light of the considerable time you've already spent with this material as the budget has been developed and presented, I'll simply say that the detailed breakdown of the budget by fund, the list of enhancements, and budgeted FTE are included in the agenda report beginning on page 79 of your agenda packet. And staff recommends conducting second reading and adoption of ordinance 4900, and I'd be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. Bassett? Let's see. Is there anyone who would like to speak to the budget? Seeing no one, council, motion,
Madam Mayor, I move second reading and adoption of ordinance 4900.
second. Motion and second for second reading and adoption of ordinance 4900. Discussion? All in favor? I'll take roll. You'll take roll.
That's okay. There'll be a couple of them.
It'll take me a couple to
That's
remember that.
Beauchamp,
Yes.
Elliott,
Yes.
Goodlow,
Yes.
David Miller.
Aye.
Monica Miller,
Yes.
Wynn,
Yes.
Lilquist.
Yes.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Ellensburg, Washington, adopting the 2023-2024 biennial budget for the City of Ellensburg, Washington.
Thank you. We are at item 9B, the second reading of ordinance 4901, imposing an additional 1/4% real estate excise tax. Page 97. Mr. Bassett.
Good evening again, Madam Mayor and Council. Again, Keith Bassett from the city's Finance Department. As you mentioned, this ordinance would levy an additional excise tax of 1/4% on real estate sales, generally restricted by state law to be used for capital purposes identified in the city's capital facilities plan as part of the city's comprehensive plan. The city currently imposes the first 1/4% on real estate sales. Use of the proposed additional tax revenue is somewhat more restrictive than the existing tax, as identified in the now adopted 2023-2024 biennial budget ordinance. The revenue develops a dedicated funding source for investments in parks and recreational capital facilities. Although by no means providing full funding, the additional revenue source would be available for a portion of the over $31 million of investments identified in the city's comprehensive plan Parks and Recreation 6-year capital facilities plan, which would exceed the current level of allocated general fund and anticipated park impact fee resources. At your November 7th study session, you received a presentation of available revenue sources, of which this tax was one of the resources identified. Additionally, you've had public hearings on the budget, which includes this tax as a revenue and as an expenditure for at your November 7th and 21st regular council meetings, and specifically on this ordinance at your November 21st regular council meeting. The revenue source, real estate excise tax, are highly variable, dependent on the volume of property sales in addition to the value of the property. Approximately $380,000 is forecast to be collected annually if the tax is imposed. Collection and expenditure of the $2 is included in the adopted 2023-2024 budget ordinance. Staff identified a Scrivener's error with the ordinance effective date, which has been updated in the official ordinance to March 1st, 2023. Staff recommends conducting second reading and adoption of ordinance 4901. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for Mr. Bassett? Seeing none, is there anyone in the room who would like to speak to this issue? Seeing no one and no hands raised online, do you have a motion?
Yes, I move to approve second reading and adoption of ordinance 4901.
Second.
Motion and second for second reading and adoption of ordinance 4901.
Bochamp,
Yes.
Elliott,
Yes.
Goodlow,
Yes.
David Miller.
Aye.
Monica Miller,
Yes.
Wynn,
Yes.
Lowquist.
Yes.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Ellensburg, Washington, relating to chapter 2.25 real estate excise tax and amending sections 2.25.100, 2.25.120, and 2.25160 of the Ellensburg City Code, thereby imposing an additional 1/4% real estate excise tax.
Thank you. We are at item 9C, second reading and adoption of ordinance 4902, establishing some funds. Mr. Bassett again.
Good evening again, Madam Mayor and Council. Again, Keith Bassett with the city's Finance Department. The ordinance before you creates separate funds to budget and account for certain activities in the adopted 2023-2024 biennial budget. The funds will help maintain sound system of control over the city's finances and meet the requirements for accounting of certain transactions prescribed by the Washington State Auditor's Office. The three funds specifically created by this ordinance would enable that required accounting for the additional 1/4% real estate excise tax, the budgeted general facilities internal service fund, and Geographic Information Systems Internal Service Fund. The nature of this is a technical ordinance, which creates the necessary accounting structure to match the budget. And staff recommends conducting second reading and adoption of ordinance 4902. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Seeing none, is there anyone who would like to speak to this? And seeing no one come forward and no one online, council, do you have a motion?
Madam Mayor, I move second reading and adoption of ordinance 4902, establishing new funds under the city code.
Second.
Motion and second for second reading and adoption of ordinance 4902, establishing new funds. All in favor?
I'll take roll.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Last one. Beauchamp,
Yes.
Elliott,
Yes.
Goodlow,
Yes.
David Miller.
Aye.
Monica Miller.
Yes.
Wynn,
Yes.
Lowquist.
Yes.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Ellensburg, Washington relating to chapter 2.16 funds and amending chapter 2.16 funds to add new sections entitled 2.16.4710 Article 34 Capital Facilities Fund, 2.16.4910 Article 35 General Facilities Fund, and 2.16.5010 Article 36 Geographic Information Systems Fund to the Ellensburg City Code.
Thank you. Okay, so item 9D, ordinance 4903. This would be first reading, adopting a new chapter 4.14A, streeteries, parklets, and sidewalk cafes. Staff report, Mr. Weiner.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Terry Weiner, City Attorney. By way of background, back during the early stages of the pandemic, then City Manager John Akers issued an emergency order to, at the request of some business owners, to establish temporary streeteries to allow those restaurants to operate in the parking spaces in front of their businesses to essentially allow them to continue business when there was a pretty restrictive proclamation in place statewide restricting the number of people that could be in gathered spaces. As the pandemic continued, council took a look at this and gave direction to staff to look at the possibility of implementing a regular ordinance to formalize the temporary streetery permits as part of the city's code. Along the way, the temporary permits that were issued, initially there were 4 businesses. Currently there are 3, but those had to be extended several times, and that chronological history is in my report. And then there was a subcommittee that was formed to look at the regulations and make recommendations. And eventually those resulted in a draft ordinance that was brought to you earlier this year. At that point, there was some discussion among the council members about the role of the Landmarks and Design Commission in terms of providing design guidelines for that ordinance. And so that draft ordinance back in June did not receive first reading. Instead, it was sent back to staff, including myself and also staff for the Landmarks and Design Commission to look at those issues. The Landmarks and Design Commission then formed a subcommittee to look at recommendations for design guidelines. They considered those recommendations in full at the September 7th, 2022 Landmarks and Design meeting. Those were then brought forward in a study session before council at its October 3rd meeting. And then there were some additional direction given to staff about bringing back the ordinance that you have before you tonight. Most of the recommendations of the Landmarks and Design Commission were incorporated into this this new draft, or excuse me, this new ordinance set for first reading tonight. But I wanted to highlight a few changes between the ordinance that you saw in June and the ordinance you're seeing tonight. And so I'm at page 109 of your agenda report at the bulleted points there toward the bottom. There was a concern expressed by council about the automatic renewal that had been in the original ordinance for streeteries to automatically have their permits renewed on an annual basis. So that has been amended, and instead the permit would only be good for a year, and then anybody could apply for a permit on that same block. As you know, the ordinance provides that there's up to 4 spaces that can be occupied on a single city block. So it may be that you have more than one business wanting to use either 2 or 4 spaces, or 2 businesses or 3 businesses. So this would change this, that come the time for application period starting, which would be in September, everybody would have an equal shot on it at it. And then the determination would be made by the business that files a complete application first in time, sort of first and right process. In addition, based on recommendation from the Landmarks and Design Commission, there's a more detailed narrative that's required and site description. That is in section 0.030D, which is at page 115 of the agenda report. In addition, there was a concern about whether or not, the direction that was given was not to grandfather the existing streeteries into a new ordinance. In other words, they would also have to comply with any new design requirements. So that grandfathering clause has been removed, and instead the ordinance provides that compliance would have to be achieved by existing streeteries within 90 days of enactment of the ordinance, or if the effective date of the ordinance. So in other words, by March 21st, 2023. There's a new section in section 0.040 on page 115 that addresses materials and colors for design of the streeteries. That's again at the behest of the Landmarks and Design Commission. And I note in there that in addition to the materials and colors, that section also prohibits roof structures on the streeteries, except for fabric shade awnings and umbrellas that are removable during non-business hours. One other change was that the Landmarks and Design Commission had wanted to be the deciding authority, so to speak, on applications, whether or not they met these guidelines. And staff felt that that process might become somewhat convoluted because of the different review standards between the type 1 decision that this essentially would be by the community development director, and the way the Landmarks and Design Commission operates in more of a formal hearing process. We brought that back to the Landmarks and Design Commission at their meeting. I think it was last month, but I've lost track of time. But they did not voice an objection to that. So in other words, the Landmarks and Design Commission will review applications and make a recommendation for approval or disapproval to the community development director. The rest of the changes that are summarized on page 110 of the report are the ones that were already existing in the original draft of the ordinance from June of this year. Those include, of course, the permit fees, a discussion about the sidewalk cafe section, which is recodified from another section of existing code and also enhanced. I think that pretty well summarizes the major changes from the version you saw back in June. So with that, staff is available to answer any questions you may have. There, I note that both Stacy Henderson, who is staff to the Landmarks and Design Commission, and Jamie Allen, who's the Community Development Director, are also here to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Elliott.
So our 4 of 13, page 115, item 5. No more than 4 stalls per block. Is that a square block? Is that a section of street along one city block?
That is both sides of the street on one city block. So between 4th and 5th, for instance, both sides of Pearl.
But not Pine.
Pine would be
You're not going
considered a
around the
separate
block.
area.
It's
Yep.
just the single north-south or east-west street. And just very much appreciate the option to have a second, or have there be turnover in this process, because we're effectively renting what is a publicly owned asset. So I appreciate that. I'm a little bit concerned about first application. Can people turn applications in early? Line up on the sidewalk?
there's a date by which where they can start submitting, so.
You like Ticketmaster?
A flood of applications.
You mentioned that the Landmarks and Design Commission did not voice objection to not reviewing the proposals, I guess, the design.
It's not that they're not reviewing them, they will be reviewing, but they won't be the final decision maker on them. So they'll still be reviewing them,
They will be reviewing them.
yes.
Okay, well, you had mentioned that they didn't voice objection, but I think it was presented as though staff recommended, or said that this was the best way. It didn't feel like they made that decision. From my experience at the meetings, I'm just wondering, like, is it because they shouldn't have it, like legally they can't have it because of the type of permit it is, or was it actually if they would have said, no, we want it to be a public hearing, then are they empowered to make it a public hearing? Just trying to understand the process.
So staff considered that it would be procedurally difficult to give them final decision-making authority on what are design guidelines for temporary street permits. So that was after we came back to them at the meeting. It was after they had already made their recommendations and came back and said, here are the changes we're putting. We brought them this ordinance and said that here are the changes that we've incorporated that you recommended based on your meeting in September, and said that we're as staff, we're not recommending that you have final decision-making authority over the permit. And that was my reference to when we brought that to them, they did not voice objection to that part of it. They will still be making reviewing the applications and making a recommendation to the community development director on whether or not those permits should be granted or not, based on the design criteria.
So the difference is that it's just not a public hearing. So what's the difference?
Well, they review things. So right now they review things as a certificate of appropriateness with a public hearing. So there would not be a public hearing on this. It would be a public meeting to review it.
Would they vote to?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
One question. On D8, page 115.
I'm sorry, Councilmember, which page you?
Basically sets a 3-month.
D8 is what she said.
Yeah, D8,
On which page?
115.
115. Page 4 of the ordinance.
Yep.
I was just curious about the 3 months at this time of the year with the winter and construction. Would there be any problem with the streeteries that are currently in place making the revisions they needed to make?
That's a policy issue. I don't have any concern about that.
I was interested in that also. And from my perspective, we talked about the challenge of bringing existing structures forward to meet, standards. So from my perspective, the path to compliance, if you will, is unique for the existing structures that we have. I mean, because they were permitted without having to conform to these standards. Whereas any new applications that might come forward, everyone starts at the same level and it's fair. I personally think that it would be reasonable to provide some additional time for compliance, partly because of the season, as Councilmember Goodlow mentioned, but also the fact that these facilities were designed and constructed, albeit temporarily, without any guidance from the city. So I think it's reasonable to allow the owners of these facilities a little bit more time to meet the code. I think my general take, I think we're heading in the right direction. I guess with the letter that was added to the mix, there were some specific references to things that Landmarks and Design were told would be added to the ordinance, but apparently aren't in this draft. So
we don't need to go into it necessarily, but I guess my question is, should we assume that these will be added by the time we get to second reading?
I'd have to ask Stacy to speak to that because I'm not familiar enough with what the claimed representations were.
I'd be interested in an answer to that. I don't know if tonight's the appropriate time, but my assumption would be that if, as was stated in the letter, that these changes will be incorporated in, they would be by the time we got to second reading, or somebody's decided that they won't be. I think we should know one way or the other. I don't know where we are on that.
Ms. Henderson, can you enlighten us? And I believe Mr. Miller is referring to a letter by Fennell Miller. And did you receive that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about midway down. There were the
Mhm.
3 items plus others and you, I cited you, so I thought you'd be the person maybe to answer that.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Stacy Henderson, Community Development Senior Planner for Historic Preservation. So as Terry mentioned, the ordinance you have was brought back to the commission as a discussion item. They were given opportunity to address any concerns or questions they had with it. Let me get to where Ms. Miller did voice concerns at that meeting and the commission did agree. The main one was the reference in the proposed ordinance to the 8-foot tall walls, I believe. And that is the item they might be, the letter might be referring to. One of them, I think the discussion was they were, in support of this ordinance, but were maybe confused about if an 8-foot tall wall is allowed. I think Jamie provided guidance that means more of a screen or a post to like hang a fabric shade structure from. So their request was to clarify that wording to make sure, because a tall wall is visually obtrusive to the historic district.
Can I make, one.
Sorry, does
interjection?
that
No,
make sense?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right about that. The way the ordinance reads, they're not walls, they are 8-foot structures that are supposed to provide screening between, it must allow for screening to allow for a view of traffic between the parked vehicles and vehicles in the travel lane. So the idea is that they wouldn't be solid walls according to the ordinance.
So the way I read it, so B says it can be, the maximum structure height is 12 feet. And I read it as between 3 feet and 8 feet, it had to be transparent. So I was picturing potentially between 8 feet and 12 feet. So I'm getting 12 feet from page 116B. Maximum structure height is 12 feet.
And that's, that is a carryover from when before commission recommended that roofs not be allowed, because with roofs, they'd have to have obviously a support mechanism.
Okay, so then on page 117, F2B, it says between 3 and 8 feet, any screening from traffic must allow for views into the streetery to ensure site visibility. So do we need to amend the 12 feet to 8 feet, or is that?
It would be logically consistent to do that, yes. If we keep F2B in there, then yeah, we could basically change the 050B.
So why would someone, if there's no roof structure, why would they want the 8 feet if then they have to make it transparent? Just maybe windbreak or?
Well, you also want to provide greater separation between the traffic and the somewhat of a noise barrier, if you will, or visual barrier from traffic.
So would like lattice count as allowing views or? I mean, does it have to
Within
be?
the, well, within the
plexiglass?
materials that are allowed, yes.
Okay.
And I mean, otherwise, if you don't allow it higher than than 3 feet, you're essentially, you think of the fencing around the D and M area, that's what would be allowed otherwise. If it was kept to, I think that's actually, I'm guessing that's 36 inches maybe, or 40.
I'm picturing like wanting to string lights around the top edge or something at 8 feet, but just trying to picture what things are gonna end up with.
Can we request to remove that and limit the height of the screening from the traffic lane for consistency to also be consistent with the parklets? Says the parklets don't have those same restrictions and it feels like arbitrary 8-foot thing. I don't know. Is that something we could do?
Well, if there's a motion presented,
Okay.
you can.
But one,
certainly make
one
that.
is a structure, right? Physical structure, and the other doesn't necessarily require a structure, right? When you're talking about height.
The parklets,
Or-
do they not have,
We're talking about different,
parklets must have fencing of between
Fencing.
30 and 36 inches
we're talking
high.
like it out front of D and M, for example, right? Which is not an 8-foot high wall, right? I'm not sure.
We're gonna continue with questions and then I'll take public comment.
I have a question when it's time. Another one.
Yeah, go ahead.
For Ms. Henderson. Another point that was raised was the under materials, and I think it's 040. What was that? 040 A1 metal. So again, given that we're talking that these structures are located in historic district and there's an attempt to make them compatible with the surroundings. What is the LDC's position on the comment that metal should not be allowed? Has this been discussed and dismissed, or is this still, because the ordinance shows that metal is permitted?
Right, yeah, and the ordinance was directly taken out of their recommendations that they approved back in September. They did discuss the metal based on Ms. Miller's comments submitted at the last meeting. But they are not concerned about it. They considered it a compatible material. Trying to remember, yeah, they did. You know, the goal for these is to be compatible with the historic district, and aside from building them out of brick, they were trying to allow some materials to be able to be used.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood that LDC has weighed in on
Yes,
this.
yeah,
Okay,
they were in support of metal. That's directly taken out of their suggestions.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Is there any more questions?
What are the implications of somebody who has a business that has been permitted but is not using the permit? So you're issued the permit. You don't construct the streetery or parklet, or you do construct it and then you don't use it because you don't have adequate staffing, for example. So then those spaces are being unused.
Well, you're still paying for those spaces. You have a permit for them. If you decide not to use them, then I think that is your choice. If someone decides not to build within, if they choose not to put up the streetery at all after the permit, that would probably result in a discussion about whether the permit would lapse for disuse, as it would with any, well, I use the term building permit because they're not really getting building permits unless it's over 200 square feet. So, you know, at the end of that permit period, if it's just not used, I mean, we don't monitor them right now to see how much they're being used, and what's not being used is if you have 2 customers a night or more. I don't think that staff really would recommend that we become monitors of how much they're used.
So
Once they're
there's,
up.
sorry. So there's nothing preventing a business from paying $1,200 a year to take up 4 parking spaces, but not have them activated or occupied.
Well, again, I think if after the permit were issued and there was not progress in using it, in other words, actually erecting the streetery, then staff would follow up on that. But once it's up, I don't think so.
The temporary nature of it was, I mean, I- the subcommittee kind of tried to build in some incentives to take it down during the winter and because not all of them are structures, some of them are just fences. And I'm just wondering if I have to reread to see if the permitting system maintains that or if anyway.
So I could probably clarify. So the permit, actually, it's an annual permit, but someone doesn't have to start their permit. They can apply in September, but say they wanted to have their streetery open and start constructing in April, they could apply for April and their application would still be in the queue according to this policy. So it still does honor that temporary nature. It just provides the opportunity for other folks to be in the permitting line for that.
Any further questions?
Not a question. I'll hold off. until-
Yeah. Are there comments from folks in the room about streeteries? Peggy? Need to come up to the microphone. Sorry. You don't get captured on TV if you're not at the
Oh,
microphone.
well, I wouldn't want to miss an opportunity to be on TV.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say, as a person that eats out a lot at the restaurants in town, is first of all, I love the streeteries. And second of all, I think the thing they were talking about that you're talking about is the mesh fabric that goes around the outside and it blocks the wind really well. And which is crazy because it doesn't seem like it should, but I have some on my back porch and it does. It blocks the wind like crazy and you can see right through it. And that's what those posts would probably be for. And second thing is, I'm really sad to hear that you want to take down the roofs of the buildings that are there because the umbrella thing in Ellensburg doesn't work very well because they just go poof like Mary Poppins. And that's all.
Thank you. Any, Ms. Peterson?
My name's Julie Peterson and I live at 202 North Sprague Street. And I just wanted to make some comments in support of the proposed ordinance 4903. And I'm really glad I don't have to deal with the details first of all. So this is general support. But looking back 3 years, I think the ingenuity and the creativity that went into being a small business person while protecting public health is really to be applauded. And I think one of the happy sort of unintended consequences of that is that we ended up with these streeteries. And I spend a lot of time downtown. And I really think the streeteries have made downtown Ellensburg very inviting. It really encourages people to wander and to shop. And I think it really creates a sense of community. So to the degree that you're wrestling with materials questions and parking questions and permitting, I really appreciate it because I think it enhances the downtown experience. So I encourage you to continue to look for ways to support streetery. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room? I'm sorry to make you come to the.
I am Dee Anderson. I live at 101 East Manitoba Avenue in Ellensburg. And personally, I love the streeteries, but I can only comment on my own experience with them. As a senior citizen and one who lives alone, it is hard to express how much I have enjoyed sitting outside and actually meeting new people, and in some cases, making new friends over a cup of coffee or a cocktail. In most cases, I found that people are more open and willing to interact when outdoors. I know the parking is an issue for some folks, but I have never not been able to find a spot within a block of where I want to go. I have trouble walking, but I will gladly walk a block to get to one of our streeteries. In my opinion, the loss of a few parking spots is far outweighed by the joy brought to residents such as myself. Another issue I've heard about but do not quite understand is the roofs on these structures. Some say they are unattractive and spoil the look of downtown. I seriously doubt that many people even notice the roofs. You notice the entire structure and you smile, or you don't. It has even been suggested that the roofs be replaced with umbrellas. We all know that Ellensburg is famous for its wind. It seems to me that that alone would discourage the use of anything less than a roof. I can't imagine the havoc caused from wind-blown umbrellas. The roofs shade us from the summer sun and keep us dry on wet and snowy days. There is no substitute for that. I love sitting at the Mule on a Saturday morning, having a cup of coffee or a Bloody Mary and watching the activity at the public market. I love sitting at Pearl Street Grill and Bar when there is something fun going on at Rotary Pavilion right across the street. Listening to the music, watching the dancers, having a sandwich and a beverage. I walk with a crutch and I tire quickly. I love having the freedom to just plop myself down at B&M Coffee with a hot or cold drink and still enjoy what's going on outside. I truly hope you as the voting members on this issue will consider those of us who want and really need this resource for an opportunity to stay connected with our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the room who'd like to speak? Okay, we're going to go online. Ms. Miller, Janelle Miller,
Can you hear me?
you are unmuted.
Fabulous. I am not going to read the letter that I wrote. I am going to preface everything I say by stating that, as I have stated before, I am very much in favor of streeteries, especially ones that look like the D&M streetery, which has a low barrier wall and really does not detract from the surrounding historic district. I'm disappointed in the city staff for having produced such a vague, nebulous, and what I consider to be arbitrary ordinance. I think it was really important that the COA process with the Landmarks and Design Commission is followed. It is quasi-judicial. You're making a ruling that not only pertains to the person who is applying, but also to other applicants because of the no more than 4 spaces. It's a competitive process. And to have that happen in one person's hands behind closed doors with no set criteria. Now, I heard Attorney Weiner say that that there are design guidelines in this ordinance, but in fact, those are not design guidelines. Their design guidelines would have been much more detailed about what is allowed and what is not allowed. For instance, the attorney said something about it will absolutely go to Landmarks Commission first for a discussion or a chat or what have you, and then go to the director's office for his or her final approval. But in fact, the ordinance does not say that. The ordinance does not say a lot of things that were answered tonight in your questions, in the council's questions. The ordinance doesn't state that. So I think that the ordinance is very vague. It's too arbitrary, especially too arbitrary to be allowed to happen outside of a public process. There's no opportunity for anyone from the public to weigh in this competitive quasi-judicial situation. Whereas if it were with the Landmarks Commission still, there would be people with historic preservation expertise weighing in and allowing the public to weigh in, and potentially competitors, of course. I also have a real problem with the director arbitrarily deciding when a permit is considered complete. Even if it's not complete, he can ask for more things, or he can just say it's not complete. It's too vague and too up in the air for a competitive process that is quasi-judicial. I feel very strongly that you're making a mistake. And as far as the discussion items, the last Landmarks Commission meeting, I was there and there was discussion, and the commission asked to make changes and staff said they weren't permitted at this point because it was only for discussion. So I think that's a problem. You haven't got the Landmarks Commission signing off on this, and yet you're taking it out of their hands and putting it in the hands of a single person behind a door. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Collins is online. Can you unmute him?
Hi, Blake Collins, 402 North Pearl. I just want to thank the city council, honestly, for taking the time to really break this down and dissect and figure out what is best as we move forward in this process. I am in support with most of this ordinance. I understand the removing of the grandfathering element, invoking some sort of competition. I think I don't think it'll be quite the bull rush for permits for these. I think there was plenty of opportunity for all of us to make the decision to build a streetery early on. So I am okay with that amendment. I am a little bit confused about the removal of the roof and the fabrics being the primary use of shade and weather protection, because the fabrics, can't be within 3 feet of heat, of flame and heat source. So in my mind, I envisioned those adjustments creating a very, like, a real seasonality. Whereas at least right now we have the potential to create some sort of comfortness in the winter, whether that's through, hot water or windscreen or anything like that. But if we can only have fabric to offer shelter, I'm worried that the streeteries will definitely, won't be able to invoke any sort of winter environment that can be effective. I don't know. I'm glad to be a part of this process, and I know it's going to be multiple readings. I'm just here to participate and do whatever I can to help work with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Last call for anyone in the room to speak. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Abby Elvia, and I live at 306 Alpine Drive, Ellensburg. And I just want to say that as a staff member of the Mule, we have worked very, very hard with our streetery to make it beautiful and make it budgeted, and that we have had countless guests come in and say that they have chosen the Mule because we have the ability to sit outside. COVID is not over, and I don't know if COVID will ever be over. And that's a fact. And people are still wearing masks, they're still being careful, and people want the opportunity to sit outside if they want to. And we've had live music who have chosen to play outside, and that brought people in. And I just can't say enough good things about it, and I really, really hope that council allows us to continue our streaming. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Yes. Mr. May.
I'd like to ask Ms. Henderson if as many comments as we've had about the removal of the roofs, what was the Landmarks and Design Commission's response to the wind problem and those issues? Was that considered in the recommendation that they made?
Yes, they felt strongly that having roof structures really made these streeteries more visually impactful to the historic district. And in doing the subcommittee work that they did, they looked at other jurisdictions and what they did, and a lot of them don't usually include allowing a streetery. Many members mentioned D&M's kind of area they have as a good example to encourage it to be, less impactful to the historic district and less permanent seeming to the historic district. So,
thank you.
Yep.
Council motion or discussion? Motion first, and then discussion.
Because I would, for discussion purposes, I would move first reading of ordinance 4903, and I'd like to.
there a second? I'll second. I can do that, right?
I guess I think that this is a really good start to something that I think is, generally seen as an asset to the community. And I think working through the issues of timing, I would very much entertain, whether it's 150 or 180 days. I think that's perfectly appropriate to extend out for compliance. I too have the same question about the roof structures. It's a little bit bothersome for us to potentially take up the parking spaces for something that's not going to get used during the windy season and the cold season, or when it's snowy outside. So I would entertain, the ability to put the roof structures, or a way to put a roof structure back into the ordinance in time for second reading. But I'm generally in support of this effort.
I can, weigh in. I would concur. I'm also in support of street trees. I think they do add something valuable to downtown. And I think it's important to recognize that we've got a variety of venues, right? The D&M example is often referenced, and that's a great spot. It's quite a bit different than what we see at the Mule and at the Pearl, for example. And I think trying to sort of imagine everyone can do a D&M configuration doesn't necessarily work for everything. I don't personally think that umbrellas and tarps are a great idea with wind. I think that's kind of problematic. I get the obscuring the historic downtown argument about the roofs, but I kind of think it comes back to materials as much as design. I'm kind of at the point where I see enough. I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I really do, both staff level and with the commission. But to me, there are enough unanswered questions that I'm not necessarily comfortable moving this forward for me without some further clarification. And I appreciate that a lot of it can be added at second reading. Maybe that's the appropriate, or by second reading, that's the appropriate way. But there are so many questions that I'd like to maintain the progress. And I guess that the subcommittee's work and the combination with staff has gotten us where we are today. I just feel like if this was second reading, I wouldn't be able to support the ordinance as presented. Maybe enough refinement and clarification can be added by second reading that I want to support this. I really do. I'm also, I agree with some of the comments made earlier that there's a lot of sort of judgment isn't exactly the word I'm looking for, but there are a lot of potential situations where the ordinance doesn't really speak to a process clearly. Occurs to me that you could have a current permit holder apply for a permit as the code or as the ordinance suggests, facing the fact that their current permit would be expiring at December, the end of December, and not yet have an approved permit for the following year. Well, the ordinance says that the structure has to be removed at the end of the year. And I get that the judgment of the director can say, well, if you have a pending application, we wouldn't enforce that. But that's my point. It becomes arbitrary. Kind of depends on the judgment of an individual to say, well, technically you're supposed to remove your structure if you don't have a permit at the end of your permit period. But if you're, seeking another permit, you're kind of creating a catch-22. So that's just an example of this. And I know that there are a lot of questions about the initiation of construction following the permit. And then if someone wants to construct it in the summer, then you've got to get somebody else to make an arbitrary decision that the clock doesn't really start until you've got a set date of construction. So you could, in theory, approve a permit in January, but not issue it until May. And it gets to be kind of vague in many cases, and I'd like to see it tightened up. It's kind of where I'd like to go. Lastly, I think the fee structure, I appreciate the fact that there's value to these in the downtown, but it strikes me that, the wording in the staff report essentially talks about nominal recovery of fees to the city and any excess fees being subsidized by the general fund. And I'm not entirely sure. We're not talking about a huge amount of money here, but the concept that this activity, which we're taking I get it. We're taking parking spaces out of circulation to the benefit of the businesses and the people that frequent those businesses. Those are all good things. But I'm not sure that it, is something that, I mean, when we're talking about subsidizing an activity, I think that's something we need to be a little bit more clear on what the real cost is to the city. So I, again, fully support the development of a workable ordinance, but I feel like we've got some more work to do.
Anyone else?
Let's see. I also have concerns as to where it's at, especially hearing some interest in permanent shading structures. I feel like that's opening a can of worms for a process that doesn't have a COA. And as somebody who manages a business in the historic district and complies with the color of the paint and the selection of the materials and the size, the sign restrictions in terms of materials and sizes, to not have that same oversight to structures that will have a visual impact on the downtown does not feel consistent and in keeping with this huge effort that we put into maintaining a historic district for a reason. So to create things outside of those regulations does not feel, I don't feel like that honors the intention and the work of the owners of the buildings and the managers of the buildings and the Landmarks and Design Commission overall. So I just want that to be considered in this ordinance.
Anyone else?
Well, I support all the comments that have been made so far, and would like to see more work being done on this before we.
Okay, so the current permits expire December 31st. So either we pass first reading and then amend, be specific about what amendments we want brought back to us for second reading, or next meeting, we'll need to get another extension in front of the council. Would probably be the prudent thing to do, just because no guarantees we pass next in 2 weeks anyway. I guess just would add my comment that unless I'm just not seeing it and rereading it, the process, I think, is what I would like to see more detail about when this comes back to us. So I think if we're not going to pass this first reading, we need to be specific about what changes we want. And I don't know that we're going to have agreement on roofs. I mean, and we could take a straw vote on that.
Motion.
Okay. The second will agree.
So we'll do nothing.
Well, I think that there's support for the streeteries, so the question is, how do we get to the ordinance we want to pass? I think maybe David and Monica, it maybe has the most specific concerns. Do you guys want to go through it? And
What I said is just, and I don't know the code up and down, but it does feel like it should be consistent with the rest of the design requirements for the downtown businesses in terms of colors and materials used and oversight by the commission. Like, explore that more.
the colors are in the ordinance.
They're listed.
Well,
It just says appropriate as to the director's approval.
You're right. They have to present the colors, but colors are mentioned several times, so I guess I assumed that they had to
Yeah.
meet the color palette, the historic color
It
palette.
doesn't say that, I guess.
Doesn't say that.
That's kind of the devil's in the details. Yeah. I think Madam Mayor, what your comment about the process, I think is really structural and it's important. I think it needs to be clarified. I also have to confess, I don't fully understand. I get that it's not a COA. I get that, but I don't understand exactly why we have to move so far away from that kind of process. Whether it's a type 1 map or process or whatever it is, but and I think as Councilmember Miller mentioned, I think we're managing an activity within the historic district. And it just strikes me that it's odd to sort of extract that from the commission that deals with that in other ways. And to the point about the reality is that a lot of these structures are going to remain in place permanently through 1-year extensions every single year. There will be, I would bet that in 10 or 15 years, there will be structures, streeteries that were created 3 years ago. So the effect is they become permanent part of the landscapes. And I think that especially if we're talking about applying design standard criteria retroactively to existing structures, I just think that it's important that the landmarks and design should weigh in on that and have some input. And I get that I've sat through those meetings and they can spend an hour and a half discussing the difference between 2 shades of green. I get it. I get that, but it's important to, have, whether it's the National Park Service standards or whatever criteria that staff relies on to have that, transparent public process. And I think I personally, that's what it feels right to me, but I don't know how we incorporate that into the ordinance without major revision. Or even if it's technically legally permitted.
About the roofs. It seems to me that without protection from the elements that a roof would allow in terms of rain or even possibly wind or particularly snow, streeteries without how much can they be open? How much is removing the protection that the current streeteries have now, the 2 of them, going to impact their business when it rains and in the wintertime when they want to use those. It's snowing. So I'd like to see that addressed. Possibly, could it possibly be with the Landmarks and Design Commission, could there be an option for the roof and not a dictated type of structure material?
That's a discussion for them. So.
No, I don't feel like staff has any direction because I've heard different comments from different council members, but I don't have any idea as to how you want this revised other than, I don't know about the COA process. So
And more detail.
yeah, I think it's either going to take a council subcommittee to look at it or more direction because I don't have anything right now.
I was just gonna say, I'd suggest that we pursue I think we do need to address the extension for the end of December expiration. And I think we just need more time on this. There is no rush if we cover the extension.
Right, but we need a process to get there, and right now we don't have one. And I think that what I was trying to say was if David and Monica could be a subcommittee.
Second.
Because you seem to have the most opinion on this.
But that isn't a good thing necessarily.
And well, we need to get your concerns taken care of. And there's no No other way to do it.
It makes total sense to me.
I think the existing subcommittee that put so much work into this and landmarks and design and staff combined have all the answers.
But not the concerns. They gave us their best shot already. And
I'm pretty sure I'm the best one for the job.
There you go, there you go.
yeah, I'm sure you are. So
I'm not unwilling to work on it. The problem is we're no closer to having a path for figuring it out. I mean, truly, I think it incorporates landmarks and design in a way that, you know, we don't want to, you know, go back and repeat the work that I just don't have a good enough feeling, strong enough feeling about the level of coordination and follow through. And maybe we just need additional feedback from staff before we dive in head first.
well, I would suggest that you and Ms. Henderson and Mr. Weiner get together in the same room and go through the ordinance. And
And the subcommittee of the commission.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Landmarks
I
Commission
do-
Subcommittee.
I do recall that meeting that where these points were brought up and, you know, there were some comments like, oh, I didn't catch the 3-foot thing. Oh, right, I didn't catch that either. Oh, right, I didn't notice that, oh, copper, who would build something out of copper these days? You know, so there were some points of clarification that could be, from my memory, flushed out a little bit and maybe put in more direct alignment with the current design code. That
Yeah.
makes sense?
Yeah, and the other point too is that, and maybe this is a minority opinion or a view, is that I still don't have, and maybe the subcommittee did have a good grasp of this, but and it sounded like it was a legal procedural basis for this, where the decision-making process was, I wouldn't say the Landmarks and Design Commission was bypassed, but they're essentially being informed, but they're not in a decision-making role. And is there, is that a legal, are we tethered to that legally? Is that best practices, or is it just something that we really can't modify without running afoul of the law in some way?
Well, it becomes somewhat problematic when the Landmarks and Design Commission acts on a COA. It's quasi judicial hearing, as you know, and if the applicant is denied a COA or they disagree with the ultimate determination, they can appeal that to the full city council. The way that a permit, especially a temporary permit, is considered a type 1 decision, which has no appeal process. So now, if you determine that you want this to go through the COA process, I frankly would have to look at the implications for that, because you've taken a type 1 process and inserted essentially a type 4 process, which is the determination by a quasi judicial body followed by appeal to council. In this case, there's a separate appeal process in this ordinance for someone who's agreed by decision on permit that would be different from what they would get from Landmarks and Design. It would be pretty confusing.
And I can see the practical side too. I mean, this is an annual repetitive process, and it would add significantly to the workload of Landmarks and Design. But I think, to the mayor's earlier comment, if the process is delineated where it goes from applicant to Landmarks and Design to department, if that is fully incorporated, I think that might help. Won't satisfy all the concern probably, but I think, to your point, I think it keeps us sort of in the right territory. But yeah, I think as long as we can agree to some sort of an extension on the current permits, where we don't have to get this done in the next 2 weeks, I would say I'd more than willing to jump in on that, but.
I don't agree with the extensions, to be honest. I mean, we're looking at making this an annual renewal process, and they've already had 2 years of having these streeteries open. If we're looking at fairness on this, we should allow them to take it down, get this order in place, and then they can reapply like any other business downtown, instead of having a grandfathered in already because they're there. You know,
I think
I
that,
like the idea of having the streeteries and adding the business aspect downtown, but I don't. We have so many more things that we should be doing, and we've spent a year fussing over this, and we've taken 2 weeks to decide on a red. So I'm ready to move forward. I would make a motion to scrap this and start fresh next year.
I just, the information that we received in the subcommittee was the cost of, from the Pearl, the cost of taking that down and putting it back up was many thousands of dollars.
Right.
Maybe tens of thousands of dollars. So,
They're being given an unfair advantage into next year's cycle already.
we can do this extension for 1 month or 2 months, not another, it won't be another year. Would be what I would anticipate. It's just enough time to get to ask Mr. Miller to,
Heather Miller.
to get together with the Landmarks and Design Subcommittee members and staff. Yeah, I agree with you. They should not get another year without having to go through the process.
Ask a question, point of order. Well, I'm not sure I heard Councilmember Wynn or didn't. Did he make a motion? He said he would move, but we have a motion on the floor currently.
No, that motion's been withdrawn.
That's
Withdrawn. Okay, all right.
So is
thank
there a
you.
sec,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
is there-
you-
it-
you
yes,
comment.
ma'am.
Is there a second to Mr. Wynn's motion, which was to scrap this and not move forward, not move it?
It's an
That
anticipation.
motion fails.
Okay. And I would just comment that I guess it's moot because it didn't pass, but I would argue that whatever advantage is being provided to the existing permit holders is nominal at this point, and it's only due to the result that the city has yet to fulfill its obligation to approve a policy. So that's what we're trying to do. So I think until we do, I don't think the local businesses should be penalized for that. I really don't think there's a significant advantage being provided, especially if it's a month or 2 or 3 or whatever it is. I mean, they're really not being penalized as much as they're reverting back to the way it was before the proclamation from the governor, allowing them to do the streeteries in the first place. It's just basically a reset. I would disagree. I think there's real, as the mayor indicated, there would be significant economic penalty. So I just disagree with that.
Yes, good luck.
So I'm prepared to make a motion to extend the streeteries.
Man, I'm sorry, to interrupt, but we will have to do that by resolution, but if you want to propose a date, that's fine, but
Okay.
we'd
I
have to
would
formalize that
propose,
the next meeting.
a Resolution that reflects February 28th as
So
a deadline to have.
that would just be guidance to
Yeah.
staff, to.
Okay.
They would bring something back at our next meeting. That would make that extension.
Okay. I don't know if that's
And
too
that
long or
means-
not too.
That means we would have until the February 28th. To get this to a place where 4 of us can vote for it.
So, and just for council's information, that means that there would have to be something for council, for staff to be able to bring back at the first meeting in February in terms of an ordinance.
So we would have 1 month of
Correct.
time to, well, 1.5 months.
Yeah.
Christmas.
Just full disclosure, I'm going to miss out the first.
Okay.
half of December, second half. of
So,
December.
so February 28th might not be enough time. but We'll see.
I think we can deal with it.
Okay. We have direction. Somewhat, kind of.
I didn't, there was a motion on Councilmember Goodlow's behalf, but I didn't hear a second. or-
We
Well,
decided it was guidance.
Okay.
Guidance for,
Part of that would be, do we need to include the subcommittee with David and Monica to into that guidance? Have you already done that?
Well, I'll be gone the first half of January,
Yeah, that's what I was gonna mention, maybe.
so can we just extend that through March? I mean, or why not? Why not?
I,
And
Yeah, that's not a consent, I mean, that's not a consensus decision. I disagree with extending this out. You know, at our convenience, we're dropping the ball on this.
Fine,
We need to
February.
fix this.
I think that we need to be realistic, though. I mean, end of February, having a draft ordinance back by first meeting of February, essentially, or something, that, given that we're gonna lose half of January with your participation, I think it doesn't feel very realistic that
that
we're gonna make that
December
progress.
and second half of January.
Yeah, I mean, we can give it a try, but I have concern about.
Somebody else could volunteer to do it.
That's true. I think that's true. That's a good point.
We will try to get this. Did you volunteer?
Well, I'll do it, but you won't like it.
We just have to get some.
Fine.
All you need are four votes, right? It's not that hard.
You don't need a motion setting a subcommittee. Good.
Not at all. Thank you.
Okay. Moving on. Item 9E, this is first reading of the supplemental budget ordinance.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council, and Keith Bassett with the city's Finance Department. The proposed ordinance amends the 2021-2022 biennial budget to reflect changes in operational requirements and adjustments to capital project plans approved through prior council action, along with other modifications to the biennial budget as proposed by the city manager. Additional budget adjustments were identified as a result of a review of anticipated expenditures, expenditure trends, and current expenditure authority. These items provide the necessary budget to maintain the programs and projects previously adopted by council, comply with external regulations, and update originally budgeted amounts to current forecasts. The amendments principally update expenditures to reflect increased prices for infrastructure, maintenance, and construction, increased utility and energy costs, and expenditure of grants awarded this year. Items previously approved by council include professional services to support replacement of the city's utility billing and customer information system, replacement of outdated meter reading equipment, additional professional services costs associated with the transition to contracted animal shelter services, snow and ice control supplies, construction bid overrun of the Gateway 1 University Way project, lodging tax funded banners on key streets, and installation of athletic field lights at Rotary Park. Many items include additional grant revenue, including extending telecommunications infrastructure to the city's wells west of town, which is a NTIA grant, Brick Road improvements design, the Helena Ave Complete Streets Improvement Project, and additional grant funding for the Gateway 1 project. Other items to sustain previously approved projects and programs include additional funding for snow and ice control, increased expenditures for risk management and insurance premiums, medical costs, additional costs for providing fire relief and pension and left one long-term care and unreimbursed medical costs, costs associated with increased fuel and natural gas prices, and a preliminary transfer of geographic information systems related fund balance from the Information Technology Internal Service Fund to the new GIS Internal Service Fund. The amendments maintain adequate fund balance within the city's fund balance policies, and details of all items by fund included in the ordinance are found beginning on page 128 of the agenda packet. Staff recommends conducting first reading of ordinance 4904. Thank you.
There are questions for Mr. Bassett?
Madam Mayor, I move first reading adoption, or first reading of ordinance 4904.
Second.
Motion and second for first reading of ordinance 4904 supplemental budget. I don't see anyone in the audience who would want to comment. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I too will vote aye.
An ordinance amending the 2021-2022 biennial budget of the city of Ellensburg as set forth in ordinance number 4864 and previously amended as set forth in ordinance number 4875, ordinance number 4881, and ordinance number 4886 to adjust appropriations in the city's funds.
You. We are at item 9F, revision of city code regarding electric utility fee and credit schedule. Mr. Myers.
Good evening, council. I'm Paul Meyer with the City of Ellensburg Light Department. I'm here today to talk to you about ordinance 4905 to revise city code for electrical utility fee and credit schedule. This ordinance with the revision of the schedule essentially covers three different parts. One is an adjustment to the way we charge our customers for the installation of electrical services. We found that we weren't adequately reflecting the actual costs to install the materials, specifically the labor related to the materials. We were charging on a per unit foot for labor. We revised that to charge basically a trip charge or a lump sum labor fee for the installation of these services. The second part of the revision is to remove a portion of that code that allows us to essentially lease spare conduit out to communication companies. To date, we don't have any communication companies taking advantage of that. And we don't see that serves as a benefit to customers or the ratepayers. And the third part of that was just some general clarifications on language. Typically, or previously, we had language that referred to wages for charges, and we've changed that language to read rate instead of wages. So we feel that allows us to better charge actual costs for things like equipment and not just wages. And we also clarified some language regarding to inspection, who is performing inspections and the charges associated with that. That is essentially the three sections that we're changing and the three main topics. So I'm here requesting that you approve the first reading of ordinance 4905, revise the city code section for electric utility and credit schedule.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Meyer? Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak? Okay, seeing no one, is there a motion?
Move to approve ordinance 4905 first reading for the revision of city code section 9.92.100 electric utility fee and credit schedule.
Second.
Motion and second for first reading of ordinance 4905 as stated. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I too will vote aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Ellensburg, Washington relating to chapter 9.92 utility fee and credit schedules and amending section 9.92.100 electric utility fee and credit schedule of the Ellensburg City Code.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're at item 9G. This is a resolution to approve fiscal year 2022 bad debt write-off.
Good evening, Council and Madam Mayor, Jerica Pasco, Finance Director for the city. The proposed resolution before you authorizes the write-off of uncollectible utility accounts, miscellaneous invoices, parking citations, and library accounts for fiscal year 2022. The city currently contracts with Merchants Credit Association for collection services for all accounts except for library accounts under $100. MCA has determined the accounts included are uncollectible due to the statute of limitations, bankruptcy, or death. The library uses Unique as their collection agency for those accounts under $100. and they consider outstanding amounts uncollectible for patrons who have not been responsive to Unique's collection attempts for the past 2 years and have not used their library card. The table on page 142 of your agenda report shows the write-off history for the current year and the previous 5 years. As you can see, utility accounts still account for majority of the write-offs, but they are lower than previous years. This includes approximately 180 utility accounts with an average of around $200. Majority of these accounts are included due to they've passed the statute of limitations. Writing off the uncollectible balances will reduce the revenues not yet recorded for the city by $54,166.49. Staff recommends that council adopt the resolution 2022-41, writing off uncollectible delinquent accounts totaling $54,166.49.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Pasco? Is there any, is there a motion?
Move to adopt resolution 2022-41 to approve fiscal year 2022 bad debt write-offs.
Second.
Motion and second to approve resolution 2022-41 to approve bad debt write-off. Discussion,
Sorry, that was good.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I too will vote aye opposed. Motion carries. And next is a pay resolution. Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor Loquist and members of council. For the record, Lisa Young, HR Director. And what I have for you tonight is a resolution number 2022-42 pay resolution for fiscal year 2023 for non-represented employees. By way of background, a pay resolution is submitted to the council for consideration each year. The resolution, if adopted, will establish the fiscal year 2023 pay scales for non-represented employees. Annual step or merit increases for those for non-represented employees will be available in 2023 for those who are not at the top of their pay scale. This resolution includes the new positions identified in the 2023-2024 biennial budget. By way of a previous council action, ongoing support of established competitive pay and benefits for city employees. HR and the city manager completed a holistic review of the non-union wage scales to ensure that we are competitive in the labor market and to address any inequities that have occurred by mid-year pay adjustments. The first step of the review process was using the AWC 2022 salary survey results to identify cities that fell within a 50% deviation based on population, assessed value per capita, sales tax revenue, and regular levy amount. This method was selected to help account for our higher cost of housing. The second step was to review the internal data to ensure that internal equity was considered. Between these two steps, approximately 20 positions received an adjustment. The third step applied a 4.5% cost of living adjustment to each position. Next, a pay grade system was created. This includes a 50 pay grade grid of 2.5% increments, and each grade has 6 steps, also in 2.5% increments. The structured system will allow for improved consistency when creating or adjusting pay scales and will provide a better visual for the overall compensation plan. And finally, non-union employees have historically contributed through payroll deduction to an HRA VEBA account. Part of the compensation change for 2023 will provide an employer paid contribution to each employee's HRA VEBA account in the same amount as the current employee payroll deductions, which will cease as of 12/31/2022. The financial impact of the fiscal year 2023 pay resolution is as follows, and this is base wages only. For market-based adjustments, $216,167. For the cost of living, $265,512. For the pay grade implementation, $102,876. And for the change in VEBA contribution, $66,000 for a total of $650,555. The cost of this adjustment will spread across the various funds that support employee wages and benefits. Additional expenditure authority will be needed in the 2023-2024 biennial budget to accommodate the impacts principally for the market-based adjustments and pay grade implementation. Costs for administrative and internal services functions will be charged to beneficiary funds via the standard budget and accounting procedures. Staff recommends approval of the resolution as presented, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So clarification is as presented on our desk, not in the packet.
My apologies. I should have mentioned that at the beginning.
Which was only a few dollars different.
Yes, there was a change in the building inspector position. We originally had it as a 2 and it's a 1 in the new amended motion.
Move to approve resolution 2022-42.
Yes.
Second.
Motion
I
and
just- oh, go ahead. I
motion and second, I'll repeat it. Motion and second to approve resolution 2022-42, the pay resolution for fiscal year 23 for non-represented employees.
So over my 26 years with the city, I've been here when non-represented employees, both as an employee and as a city council person, did not get any cost of living adjustments. And I very much appreciate staff for looking at this. Obviously, there's an opportunity this year to make up a little bit of ground, but very much appreciate your effort to maintain the level of service in this community. We need to not only attract, but we need to retain people. And this is a step that direction. So thank you.
I agree and appreciate the work, HR that went into this. That looks like a lot of work. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. 2 will vote aye, opposed. Motion carries.
Great, thank you.
Next is a resolution for multifamily housing limited property tax exemption. Mr. Ailing.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, and members of council, Jamie Ailing with Community Development Department. And what you do have before you tonight, this item is a multifamily tax exemption application. It was submitted by Stalder Interests Incorporated. And it was for a development that they are going to be calling 609 North Water Apartments. Just like its name, it's
Very
located at
imaginative.
609 North Water. And the project will have a total of 16 units in it. They'll be made up of both studios, 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. And if approved for the multifamily tax exemption, it will allow for the value of that new construction to be exempt from property tax, ad valorem property taxes for a period of 8 years. They're not going to meet the affordable clause to get a 12-year exemption, so it'll just be market rate. But it is within the residential targeted area that was set by council to encourage this program, to encourage development of housing. The amount that we would be estimating this to save them would be approximately $3,783 a year of taxes, for a total of $30,264 over a period of 8 years that the exemption would be good for. Like I mentioned, it is in the CC zone, which is part of the residential targeted area that council has set. If council approves the contract that's attached to the packet, Community Development Department will issue a conditional certificate of tax exemption, which will state that this complies with Ellensburg City Code 2.30050. And then it'll have a 3-year time frame that they need to complete construction, get certificate of occupancy to then be granted the final certificate, which will start the following year, the 8-year exemption. With that, I can stand for any questions.
Other questions, Mr. Ailing? I actually have one. What is the city's policy about retail on the ground floor for multifamily structures in the CC? I thought that was required, no?
There is, depending upon the street type and where they're at, there is, it depends upon where it's located. So there is a potential. I would have to look at that. I believe this one's not on the street that would require that, but I will double check that.
So maybe it's because it's north of 6th, because the one between 4th and 5th, Tyler
Water.
Vaughn's.
Yeah, that one
had to have
required
a-
it, and the next one up requires it, so.
Okay,
Which is
so
being
it's
incorporated.
it's not all of CC, it's just,
I have to
Alright.
double check that. I apologize not having that specific answer for you. I can check the code and bring that back to you. But
okay. I guess I could have tried to check it too, but I'm not sure where to look.
That doesn't necessarily affect the decision.
It does not. I just,
The structure itself, if that's a requirement, will be required to incorporate that, and I'm sure they can
Okay.
manage to incorporate those requirements with their structure.
is there anyone from the public who wants to speak on this? Seeing no one, council.
Adoption of resolution 2022-43.
Second.
Motion and second to adopt resolution 2022-43 approving the agreement with Stalder Interests, Inc. and authorizing city manager to sign the agreement. Is further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I too will vote aye opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. And is the notice of intent for annexation you too?
Is my item.
Thought you were getting away, didn't you?
I was gonna step back for item 10, but I realized there was no blue in that section, so. Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council, Jamie Ailing again with Community Development. And this before you is the initial step for a notice of intent to annex for parcel 17826 located east of Bull Road and north of I-90. This property is actually the last piece that falls within our urban growth area. It will actually hit the edge of our urban growth area. It's the last piece, the only piece on that eastern side, not within the city limits, out to the edge. So it's one parcel. It's roughly 40.6 acres in size. It's owned by Schuler Deneen family. We do have, because it's one parcel, we do have 100% signature on the notice of intent to bring this forward to council. The comp plan designation of this property is a blended residential neighborhood. Staff feels that a residential suburban zoning is fitting of this. And what is being asked of you tonight is to either accept, reject, or modify the proposed annexation boundaries and determine whether the city shall require the simultaneous adoption of the proposed zoning for the proposed parcel to be annexed, which I just stated was residential suburban, and whether the city shall require the assumption of all or part of existing city indebtedness by the area if annexed by council and agrees to move this forward. There'll be additional process that'll go through hearings if we do move it forward, but this was the initial step to decide those three items before moving forward.
Okay.
What does number 3 mean?
That's a good question.
That's when we have city bonds and it would be a proportional assumption of the debt. So that, in other words, new citizens upon annexation would have to pay their proportion of any
They're subject to
indebtedness.
that little bit of library
Yep.
or whatever.
Well, actually, the library, I think, is being paid off this year, but whatever there
The
is.
maintenance
Yeah.
bonds.
Yep.
All right, that makes sense.
Is there any comment from the public? Does it pertain to this particular action? Okay. Then we can't, it's only comment on this annexation. So, is there a motion?
Do the first two, but can we do it all in one thing? Yes. Okay, my motion is for the city to accept the proposed annexation and adopt the proposed zoning and require the assumption of existing city indebtedness by the area annexed.
Second.
So a motion to accept the proposed annexation as shown on the map, right? And to zone it and require the assumption of debt. Is there further discussion?
Just a staff comment, just technically, you're not accepting the annexation, you're setting the annexation area, but that's fine. I know the intent was behind the motion.
Thank you for the clarification. So we are setting the annexation area, zoning it and requiring debt assumptions. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Two will vote aye, opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you. We are at the city manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Heidi Barron Sternaway, your city manager. I feel like I haven't talked very much tonight, but I also want to thank you all for the tremendous amount of work you did tonight, and it represents months and months of staff time with all of the budget activities. So thank you. Just a notice, December 19th, we have a closed record public hearing scheduled for the Smith rezone. It's in your packet. And I would like to request that council set study sessions for 2023. When we came to the end of 2021, we found some value in having at least 1 hour a month to discuss topics of relevance to the council. And I hope you agree we've used that well. So my request would be that we actually set regular study sessions for 2023, and they'd be scheduled at 6 p.m. on the first Monday of each month, or prior to the first regular council meeting of each month.
So move.
Second.
Motion and second to set regular study sessions at 6 p.m. Prior to the regular council meeting, the first meeting of the month. All in favor?
Aye.
Two will vote aye, opposed. Motion carries.
Excellent. And one last item, as you all are aware, we had a pretty significant event last week. The Ellensburg Recreation and Racket Center was a total loss through a fire. So council had agreed this last fall, encouraged staff to move forward, creating essentially a community group to start talking about field houses and community centers, looking for new recreation opportunities in the community. So our goal was to get that off the ground in January. That work, with the loss of the recreation center, that really impacts a lot of individuals and families in our community. A number of those are in this room tonight. Making sure that we move forward in an expedient manner. So right now, staff are actually working on some temporary options for expanding recreation through partners in the community. And we'll continue into January looking at how we rebuild and where we rebuild. So that'll be an incredibly important process, looking at our long-term goals and to really use this as an opportunity to do something great for our community. So we will be putting out some information just in general about the mechanics of kind of the transition as we get more information this week, and try to stay ahead of that. But the intent is to look for how we can follow council's direction and make sure to rebuild something that the community can be proud of in an expedient period of time. And that's all I have.
Thank you. Councilmember Nguyen, we're going to start at your end.
I have nothing. That was the only thing I was going to speak on, and she said it a lot better than I can articulate, so I'll leave it with Heidi.
Thank you.
A couple weeks for me also. I did get to attend part of the legislative day last Monday. Found that very enlightening, so I appreciated being invited to attend. And thought the city manager did a great job representing our legislative priorities in that unique format. So thank you. Also, there's still time to buy yourself and your loved ones gifts made in Ellensburg at the Ellensburg Night Market. I attended the first one last Wednesday, and it was an awesome representation of just the creativity in our community in terms of food available and different range of gifts. So if you're not busy next Wednesday, I suggest going. Very affordable gifts and local businesses represented there.
Are you going to host this inside Gallery 1 during the winter time so we don't have to freeze while we're out there shopping?
Well, it's now actually hosted in the event space next to the Blue Rock on Pine. And I believe that's part of, the EDA's interest to activate Pine Street. And it's a really great way to do that. So experience it for yourself.
Okay. Miller.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I have no report, but I would like to request excused absence for the December 19th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second to excuse Councilmember David Miller for the December 19th meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Two vote aye opposed. Motion carries.
If I know I'm going to miss January, should I do that now?
You may.
Okay, I would also like to request an excused absence, but from the first meeting in January, not the second meeting in December.
Second.
Motion and second
Oh,
to
well,
the
I'm sorry.
reversed order.
Not a motion.
Um, to excuse Councilmember Monica Miller for the first meeting in January. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I two will vote aye opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. And you're done?
I'm done. Thank you.
Councilmember Pittle?
I have no report tonight either. And I don't plan to be absent. So.
I've been doing some work on centrifuge and we'll have planning commission this week and EMS council this week. And I got the opportunity to participate in the Thanksgiving meal on Wednesday. That was really cool. And working at the animal shelter.
Thank you. Councilmember Bojang.
Yes, very light week, couple weeks for me too. Mine all hits next week. But I, along with Councilmember Elliott, was a part of the community dinner and it was a great experience. And then hats off to that Caitlin that ran that. She did a phenomenal job. It was well put together. So just wanted to give her kudos for that.
I also attended the community dinner. I was on cleanup crew, so I was late. And Moments to Remember and the Legislative Day and a Salmon Recovery Funding Board meeting. And this Friday, I will be speaking to leadership Kittitas County for their group. And I got a couple of letters today saying from the TIB Transportation Improvement Board. We received a grant for Fenning Road sidewalks for $1,390,000 and a grant for the Main Street overlay for $400,000. So that represents like 69% of the sidewalks and 66% of the overlay. So we're getting significant amounts of funding from the state to do projects that we need to do. So with that, there is no executive meeting, so we are adjourned. Thank you.
I'm just gonna wait for Terry.
Sign all this.
Everyone's gonna be super fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be great.
Well, I blame Rich for withdrawing his motion. That's all.
Yeah, well.
There was a motion.
There was a motion, but no one was gonna vote for it.